Part of Exile 2's Third Edict update sought to address the extreme imbalance in the meta in the previous patch, 0.2 Dawn of the Hunt. In that update, the overall preference towards right side and top side passive tree builds was stark, with a massive portion of characters between level 90 and 100 positioned in those areas of the passive tree. A ridiculous 60% of those characters were made up of Amazon, Deadeye and Blood Mage builds. But why exactly was this the case? Well, there's a lot of compounding factors that contributed to the meta for patch 0.2. The fact that a new class was added, the Huntress, in the dexterity area of the tree no less, combined with the addition of the new spear weapon type certainly made a splash, but there's also the general community sentiment towards the power level of mechanics such as life and armor versus energy shield and evasion. This was a hot topic going into 0.2, especially after energy shield builds had completely dominated the initial early access launch patch in 0.1 due to how ridiculous the scaling was versus pure life builds. But even with the outright removal of Grim Feast, energy shield still reigned supreme in 0.2, in a way that was even more extreme compared to what it was in 0.1. And so enter patch 0.3, the Third Edict. For this update, GGG changed their approach drastically. Instead of layering new mechanics on top of what we already have in the form of new ascendancies, weapons and skills, they sought to tackle the very foundations of core mechanics, changing exactly how they work at a ground level, and improving methods of scaling or even adding new complementary systems. For example, the massive change to block, where you can now block any incoming hit that's not an unavoidable telegraphed possibility. But in trade-off, your passive block chance is capped at a default maximum of 50%, down from 75%. Or the huge changes to Evasion to do a very similar thing, allowing you to evade all unavoidable hits. And with that change, GGG also removed acrobatics and shifted the formula for evade chance, meaning you now need more evasion rating to reach a higher chance to evade. On top of that, there was the addition of deflection in an attempt to solve the problems posed to pure evasion life builds. Then for armor, we had the addition of fairly accessible modifiers to apply armor's mitigation to elemental hit damage, whilst energy shield lost the recovery from life flask tech from Eternal Youth. But that's just the defensive changes. There's also been a lot of core changes to offensive mechanics. For example, totems now scale from your equipped weapon damage rather than only gem levels, whilst the crossbow had its reload movement speed addressed in an attempt to tackle some of the clunkiness of that weapon type. But how well did patch 0.3 actually do in terms of shaking up the meta? Did we see that massive shift that many had expected? Well, here's the side-by-side for level 90 to 100 characters in 0.2 on the left to 0.3 on the right, both with a snapshot of week 1 into the release. And one thing is immediately apparent: there is a huge shift in the ascendancy share. Amazon has fallen off massively from a remarkable 51% in 0.2 to just 3% in 0.3. Expected considering the nerfs and the fact that Huntress is no longer the new hotness in this patch. Then there's the meteoric rise of the Deadeye, which already had a respectable 9% share in 0.2, up to a whopping 48% in patch 0.3. That's right, almost half of all of the characters over level 90 in the week 1 snapshot for the Third Edict patch were Deadeyes. Another notable change is the surge in Blood Mages. Now it's worth pointing out that Blood Mage was actually very popular towards the end of 0.2, and that's because as an ascendancy, it is and has been very powerful for late game scaling once you have very good gear. But one of the big problems for the Blood Mage prior to patch 0.3 was its potential to league start. It was easily the worst first ascension class in the game. It felt like your build had its power nerfed from your first ascension point rather than a power boost. But another big change in 0.3 sought to change just that, with the Blood Mage now being able to spec into the first ascendancy point for free, making the first ascension much more appealing. And this has resulted in Blood Mage being a significantly stronger league starting class. However, on the other side of the coin, we have the Smith of Kitava, which was the extreme outlier for patch 0.2, with 10% of the character share despite its location on the passive tree. Well, that didn't last long, and in 0.3 this class has been severely nerfed, resulting in a huge drop in popularity from 10% to just 0.3% of level 90 plus characters in the week 1 snapshot. That is absolutely brutal. Now, something important to point out here is the Ascendancy alignment in terms of where they start on the tree and their general synergy with mechanics such as block or evasion. In patch 0.2 Dawn of the Hunt, a total of 65% of characters between level 90 and 100 originated in the Dexterity or Dexterity Intelligence hybrid sections of the tree. That's 51% from the Amazon, 9% from the Deadeye, 2% Invoker, 2% Ritualist, and just under 1% from the Pathfinder. And you may say that that makes sense because the Huntress is new, the bulk of that is the Amazon, and a lot of people are playing the new class, and you'd be right. But in 0.3 there was no new class, there was no new weapon, and there were many significant changes to core systems. So what does that share look like in week 1 of the Third Edict? Well, it looks very similar. There's a total of 61% of characters over level 90 in the week 1 snapshot that begin in the Dexterity or Dex Int sections of the tree. This time, the majority is coming from the Deadeye instead of the Amazon, but the result is still the same. A massive majority of players are favouring the mechanics inherently tied with this section of the tree, and there's a lot to dig into here. There's the discussion of Evasion and Energy Shield versus Life, Armour and Block. Now that's an interesting one in this patch, because whilst the improvement to Armour with the new elemental modifiers is quite significant, the amount of investment required before you really start to feel it in the endgame is very high. And when you compare it to an average right side build pooling an average amount of investment into Evasion and Energy Shield, the difference is drastic. Now I'm not saying that the new armor modifiers are bad. There are characters in 0.3 running around with hundreds of thousands of armor applying to elemental damage from hits, and when you start to reach those kinds of numbers, this is an exceptionally powerful mechanic. But at a baseline level with average investment, there's no contest here. Even without factoring in the new deflection mechanic, just the avoidance of evasion combined with the bonus hit pool of Energy Shield trumps armor and life. And really that's one of the biggest problems that I can see with the defensive systems in the current version of Path of Exile 2. You just need so much investment on the left side of the tree to really begin to feel tanky. And I think it always comes back to the discussion of life scaling. If life existed on the tree in any meaningful amounts, the mitigation and avoidance provided by armor and block respectively would mean so much more. But that's not the case right now. Now, on the other side of things, there's the offensive capability of builds in 0.3. Crossbows received a buff to their mobility in this patch, and crossbows are generally performing quite well, with about 10% of level 90 plus builds using a rare crossbow. And of those builds, there's actually a very even split, almost 50-50 between grenade and bolt builds, which is quite impressive. But no archetype even remotely comes close to bow setups, which almost breach the 50% of characters mark in 0.3. And there's something to be said here about the preference towards a ranged playstyle over melee. Whilst it's true we do have more ranged archetypes to choose from generally than melee, it's important to note the massive gameplay difference between the two, especially when comparing mace melee to bow gameplay. The ability to freely move around whilst dealing damage is something that cannot be understated just how important that is. Meanwhile, a lot of mace-centric skills lock you in place during their animations. And the thing is, damage is generally not a problem for any high-end builds in Path of Exile 2 right now. The best mace builds, or the best bow builds, will kill pinnacle bosses in seconds. So when damage isn't a problem, you start to focus your character investment elsewhere. And the next most important stat for the majority of people is speed. Being able to move while dealing damage, moving around faster. And the Deadeye is simply the king, or should I say the queen, of just that. And going back to defenses for a moment, you can invest all you want into defense, but ultimately the best defense in the game is always going to be not getting hit in the first place. And the best way to do that is moving fast, and being able to move while dealing damage. These are the crucial points that I feel have led to the state of the current meta in Path of Exile 2, and I think these topics must be addressed if there'll ever be any kind of balance across the passive tree. Should you really be able to ride around on your rower dealing full damage at full speed? Should a warrior be locked in place whilst they're using Sunder, for example? These are the questions that I feel must be asked. GGG made a lot of very significant changes in this patch, but the meta in terms of what is valued hasn't changed all that much from patch 0.2 to 0.3. That's going to be it for this video. Thanks very much for watching, and as always, stay tuned and stay safe.